Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, pilgrims. We are so grateful that you are here today. My name is Allison Venuto, and I am one of the board members of American Pilgrims on the Camino. And today I am very happy to welcome Kiki Lawson as our speaker, and her talk is entitled Saintspotting 101. Kiki first became fascinated by pilgrims while reading Chaucer's Canterbury Tales in high school. This eventually led to a PhD in medieval and early modern literature with some work in art history thrown in. Only after retiring from the University of Texas at Dallas a year ago, however, was she able to make a lifelong dream a reality, walking the Camino Frances in fall of 2022. She also recently became one of the 3 co-coordinators of the North Texas chapter and is dreaming of her next Camino. With that, Kiki, I'm going to turn this over to you.
All right, well, thank you, Allison. I see some familiar faces and some familiar names here. So I know for some of you, you saw at least part of the presentation at the gathering just a couple of weeks ago, I guess, in Hunt, Texas. So welcome back. For those of you who didn't see it and don't know me, I will warn you up front that this is an interactive presentation because I have spent many years as an educator, so I'm tired of the sound of my own voice. So I would love to hear what you guys have to say, and there will be points where you get to respond. So as Allison said, you can respond in the chat, or you are welcome to just shout it out. You'll see what I mean as we go along here. The other thing that I should also share with you is the subtitle of my presentation, which should warn you what you are getting yourselves into here. So the subtitle is A Reverently Irreverent Guide to Making Your Time in Churches More Enjoyable. And the reason I came up with this presentation is when I walked the Camino Frances back in September, October of 2022, if you walk the Camino, you know there's sometimes not a whole lot to do in any town other than to go in and see the church. So inevitably, most of the pilgrims in any town would wash up there at some point. And if I was there, usually, I'd be looking at things and someone would come up to me and ask, what are you looking at? Or I'd be talking to a friend. And I am by no means an expert in iconography, studying saints and knowing who saints are, like Saintspotting, identifying saints. But I did enough interdisciplinary work for my PhD that, it's interesting. I know what I'm looking at and I can tell some things. So I ended up spending a lot of time talking to people and telling them what they were looking at. And so it occurred to me when the theme of the gathering this year of lighten your load came up that was a way that I could help lighten every pilgrim's load, to give you an idea of what you're looking at in churches, to make it a little bit more interesting, because it can be overwhelming if you are going into churches and cathedrals and we don't have the background as modern day people to be able to read or look at the sculptures and the stained glass and all that and know what we're looking at. So sometimes it can be alienating. So that's the genesis of this presentation, and it is definitely irreverently reverent in that I am not making fun of anything, but sometimes there are things that are a little bit humorous. So hopefully you enjoy that. Okay, so let's start with hopefully someone you know. Who's this? This is where you get to talk, or
Santa Claus.
Santa Claus.
Saint Nicholas.
Saint Nicholas.
Yeah, look at you, you're already Saint Spotting. Yeah, Santa Claus, Saint Nicholas. Okay, now here's the fun question. How do you know that that's Saint Nicholas, Santa Claus? What about that picture? You look at that and you go, hey, I know that's Santa.
The hat, the clothes, the red and white, the gifts.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Lynn. Yeah.
The beard.
The pack.
The pack. Yep, the beard. All right, well, guess what? You guys have just done some iconography. What you just pointed out are attributes. And what an attribute is, as it says here, is an object closely associated or belonging to a specific person, thing, or office, especially such an object used for identification in painting or sculpture. So when people talk about iconography, Saintspotting, that's really all they're doing, is they are looking at these sculptures or stained glass or paintings of saints, and based on the way that person looks, the things that they're carrying or their background or things like that, they know who it is. And we've lost that skill. That's something that medieval pilgrims would have known, because most of them weren't literate. They couldn't read the text, but they could read, as it were, the paintings or the pictures. So that's really what you're doing. So yeah, you guys nailed it in terms of Santa's attributes, St. Nicholas's attributes. And I do say USA here because, of course, the depictions of Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, Sinterklaas vary from culture to culture, but essentially we saw his red pants and his jacket with the white fur trim, usually has a black belt, usually has a big white beard. That hat is sort of our shorthand now for Santa, a little pointy red hat with the white trim, sack for presents. And again, if you were brought up the way that I was, he also has a belly that shakes when he laughs, like a bowl full of jelly. So he's usually kind of a fat guy. He's usually not a skinny guy. Okay, so you are cool on Santa Claus. You've already done some saint spotting. So let's dip a toe in the water here. I'm gonna guess, based on your responses, that you guys could pick out this guy. And if you can't, if you haven't walked a Camino, I guarantee you after the first town, if not
Santiago,
yeah, you'll be able to pick out Santiago Peregrino.
St.
Yep.
James.
St. James. And yeah, he is, if you don't know, the reason why you are all going on Camino or have been on Camino. So quick recap, who was St. James? Well, the perfect time to be talking about him here during Holy Week. He was one of Jesus's right-hand men. So if you are religious and you've been going to any religious ceremonies this week, when Jesus goes into the Garden of Gethsemane, he takes 3 people with him to keep falling asleep. I mean, bad choice of friends, whatever, dude. But and those 3 people are St. Peter, St. John, and St. James, Santiago. So this is essentially one of Jesus's besties, and we'll talk about why this is important in a little bit. Things to know about Santiago. First of all, why do we call him St. James, and why does Spain call him Santiago? Okay, so that's an advanced question. There's lots of ways you can
His name in Latin would have been Jacobus.
Jacobus, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, so he would have been Sanctus Jacobus, and if you say it in the genitive, meaning the possessive, like of St. James, it's Sanctiagobi. And if you start saying that fast, so if you're talking about the book of St. James or the sculpture of St. James, if you start saying that fast, Santiagobi, you start to hear Santiago, and the endings tend to drop off things. And so it all gets run together, and that's how he's Santiago. For some reason, we run the saint and the Jacobus together in that one person in a way that we don't tend to in others. So that's why he's Santiago. And that can get confusing because we call him St. James, Santiago in Spain, Saint-Jacques in French. So he has a lot of names, just he's got a lot of sculptures, so you'll see him everywhere. So he was one of Jesus' right-hand guys, not as famous as Peter, and also not an incredibly effective disciple. He drew the straw that he, after the death of Jesus, got sent to death and resurrection, got sent to Spain, of course, which is why he's there. And he managed to, in his time there, get a whole 7 disciples. So he didn't win a whole lot of converts initially. He went back and was beheaded by Herod Agrippa and would have faded into obscurity other than some events that happened later on, which is, and I'll cover that in a minute, why we have the whole Cathedral de Santiago. Okay, so here's our guy. What are his key attributes? What are the things when you look at that sculpture, you know that that is Santiago?
The book.
He's got a book. What else?
Hat with a shell on it.
Yep, and what kind of shell is that?
That's a, it's a coquille Saint-Jacques. No,
Right, right. Yes, a coquille Saint-Jacques or a scallop, right? Okay, what else?
It's a scallop shell.
Okay, what else do you see?
It's got a staff with a gourd for carrying water.
Yeah, you've nailed pretty much all of them. So he's got that seashell, the coquille Saint-Jacques, the scallop shell. And really, if you think about it, he is wearing the prototypical Peregrino outfit. So he's got his seashell, which we carry on our backpacks to symbolize that we're on that Camino. He's got his walking stick, his trekking pole there as a medieval trekking pole. He's got a gourd, which is his medieval water bottle. He's got the dopey hat, and I will call it dopey hat. There's probably a proper name for it, but I have a love-hate relationship, as Allison well knows, because I was just whining to her last weekend about it. That wide-brimmed hat that you wear, especially across the meseta and things like that, which no one looks good in, and it's a stupid hat, but it's also a highly effective hat in terms of keeping sun off of you. He's got a cloak, which is the medieval equivalent of a poncho. It's what you wore to keep the rain off. And he's usually depicted bearded, not that all of us grow a beard on the Camino, but like shaving and things tend to maybe perhaps go by the wayside a bit. So that would have been something that would have been easy to do. So yes, he's rough and ready to go. So he's already wearing the outfit that we all end up wearing. In case any of you are curious and want to know where you could see this if you are on the Camino, I snapped this picture just to get St. James, but I was really excited because next to him, this is in the Iglesia de San Saturnino in Pamplona, and that is Saint Saturnus there on the side, and everybody thinks it's San Fermin because you see the little bull down there, the running of the bulls. Just a little side note, that whole thing is a misnomer. We think that San Fermin was the one who was crucified or martyred by being dragged behind bulls, but it was actually his mentor, San Saturnino. So there you go. So I had to do a lot of work to figure out which one that was. And sometimes you don't know, but that guy had the bull, so that was an easy one to pick out. Okay, so everybody good with St. James so far?
Yep.
If you are, and you've not been on Camino, guess what? You now will be able to spot him everywhere you go, because this is just a random selection of 5 different Santiagos that I found on the Camino, but I could have put 25 up because he shows up in many different guises. And how do you recognize that it's St. James? Because he doesn't always look the same. Well, the same stuff that you just mentioned before. So you see his walking staff, and you see this dopey hat kind of in profile. You see the gourd. He's right there over the Irachi wine fountain. Again, that gourd and the staff and this shell kind of tip it off. So in each one of these, here, I'd say he's a little underdressed for the elements, but he's still good to go out there in front of Burgos Cathedral. And even I found him on a door knocker as I was walking along. So you'll see him in many, many, many different guises. And that can be a fun thing on Camino. If I go back, I'd probably take even more pictures because it's just fun to see all the different ways that Santiago Peregrino, Santiago dressed as a pilgrim, shows up, because he's everywhere selling everything. Okay, so if you're good on that part, now we'll up the ante a little bit, because there's a second Santiago that you will find on the Camino, and he's a little bit more troublesome, and that is Santiago Matamoros.
Yeah.
And the reason I say he's a little bit more troublesome is this is why he is the patron saint of Spain, or one of the reasons that he is. But for modern audiences, he's a little bit troublesome because what he's doing. If anyone's got good Spanish, what does Matamoros mean?
Kills the Moor.
Yeah, he's the Moor killer. So, and Moors are now modern day Muslims. So that's a little bit troubling politically. So what this has to do with is, so in Common Era 42, what we used to call AD 42, St. James is beheaded by Herod Agrippa, and his remains are brought to Spain. You'll hear in various ways. Some say it was on a boat that washes up in Murcia. Others say that it's pushed to shore by St. Mary and Patron. There's lots of tales, but basically it comes to Spain, and the remains are lost at some point. And then in the year 813, in the Common Era, or AD, a hermit Pelayo or Pio finds these remains. He follows these stars to a field and finds these remains, and somehow knows that they're the bones of St. James, and the bishop and the king of Spain at that time, or the king of that area, both say, yep, these are the bones. And so a small chapel gets built there. And then for the next 40 years or so, it's a small chapel. People can come to worship because relics are a big deal in the Middle Ages. So if you have the relics of a saint's bone somewhere in the Middle Ages, it's like it's the equivalent of like getting a sports franchise now in terms of being a constant moneymaker for your area. And you'll get lots of tourists, pilgrims, to come see it. So it was a great source of income. And the bigger the remnant you have, the better. So I've been to places that, and maybe you have too, I find this really amusing, I kind of keep a list, that have things like a fragment of the true cross, or a thorn from the crown of thorns. And if you spend any time looking at these things, I've probably seen enough thorns from the crown of thorns to make a like 20-foot tall bush just full of thorns, or enough remnants of the true cross to make about 16 crosses. You also find some fun things with relics. Who is it that I've seen? St. Catherine of Siena. I have seen 2 skulls of St. Catherine of Siena. And that seems a little problematic because she was one person, but this has been explained in that one was her skull when she was a teenager, and the other was her skull when she died. So you can't think too deeply about these things. But so to have the relics, the entire relics of the saint, is a big deal. And so this would have brought people to what is now Santiago de Compostela to come see it. But it was just a small starter chapel at the time because, you know, St. James was well known. He's one of the besties of Christ, but he wasn't like St. Peter or someone really huge like that. But this all changed with the Battle of Clavijo in 852 CE or 852 AD. And that's when it's a battle during the Reconquista. So the Moors have taken over Spain, and all of Christianity basically is going on the Crusades to help regain Europe from the infidels, from the Moors. And so the frontier of this is essentially where the Camino is, so that northern part of Spain. And in Clavijo in 852, there's a big battle, and St. James appears on the side of the Christians and starts slaughtering some of the Moors. So that's why we have Santiago Matamoros. So it's the idea that Jesus' bestie is on our side now, and he's joined the fight, and he's come into the fight. Well, this was a great move on the side of Spain because look, hey, we won a battle, awesome. It gets a lot of money poured in both to the cathedral and to the Crusades because fighting the Crusades takes a lot of money. So getting people to fight the Crusades in Spain is really helpful because the Spanish themselves, or the various kingdoms of Spain, what is now Spain, can't win it back on their own. So you get more people to come in and fight because basically God is on your side. So this was a great PR move to have Santiago come in. So he makes him very famous in Spain. He's a patron saint of Spain, but also everyone wants to come fight and give money, which means that the cathedral in Santiago begins to grow and grow and grow and get more and more pilgrims, which feeds more and more money. And so we now get the center that is Santiago de Compostela today. Okay, so that was a big history lesson, but it's good to know. So how is this Santiago Matamoros, different from Santiago Peregrino? What do you notice that does not look like his regular kit?
The horse.
Yeah, he's on a horse. It's a little easier to slay people when you're up above them. So yeah, he's on a
Sword.
horse.
The sword,
What was that?
the
Sword.
sword.
Yeah, he's got a sword. Again, helpful for killing people. So no more gourd, no more walking stick. He traded that out for a sword. And then, yeah, the obvious one, he's usually depicted as conquering more and more people, usually wearing turbans or in some way, obviously not Christian. So yeah, you'll see him in a couple of places. This is in Burgos. It's generally not front and center as much anymore, but it certainly is in the Santiago Cathedral. But you will see him, and in fact, this one is great because this you don't see very often. Yeah, any idea who this guy up here is?
God the Father?
Yeah, you don't see God the Father depicted very much as a being, but this is one of the few times that you do see him. So he's up there kind of blessing St. James. So you know, just in case you missed it, that God has sent St. James to go fight for us. So the other thing I wanted to point out with Santiago Peregrino, and it's one of those things that does make you shake your head. So Santiago Peregrino is dressed as a pilgrim. Where is he a pilgrim to? thought about that?
To himself?
Yeah, he is a pilgrim to his own grave. So you can't think about that too much without it getting very, very confusing. So yeah. Okay. So you've got the big two so far. You've got Santiago Peregrino, Santiago Matamoros. But who's this guy?
Oh, San Roch.
Yeah. So there's this guy that you will see on the Camino that looks like Santiago, but it's not. And I call him Sexy Santiago because you notice he looks a little bit different. So how is he the same? So he's not Santiago, as you pointed out, he's San Roque or San Roche. He's got a lot of similarities, right? He's got the dopey hat, he's got his cloak, he's got his seashell, he's got his staff with his gourd, he's got his beard.
He's showing off his leg with a bubo from the plague.
Right, yeah, so he is a plague saint, so he's showing off that plague wound that he has on his bubo. And there's a couple that you will see that do that, but it's like, why, what? That is so weird. The other thing that you might not be able to see is he's often accompanied by a dog. So there's a little dog down here in the corner. And the reason for that is, so he was tending people who had the plague and then got the plague. So he himself went to go live in the woods, and all of his food and everything, all of his care was taken to him by a dog. And he's sometimes bearded, but he's sometimes not. So that can sometimes be a difference. And the main difference that I usually think about is he usually has great boots on. And part of that is he's a medieval saint. He's not an early Christian saint. So he is going to tend to have more medieval garments on. So you get to see his great boots. Those would have been very expensive, very hot boots back in, say, the 15th century or so. So I always like to look at his boots because look how detailed they are. They've got the gold and everything on them. So they're great boots.
I think also the dog, the legend is that the dog licked his wound from the plague and he was miraculously healed. So to this day, he's the patron saint of dogs or dog owners.
That's right. Do you know what else he's the patron saint of? And it cracks me up.
Oh,
He is the patron saint of dogs, invalids, that makes sense because he cared for people who were sick, bachelors, don't know about that one, and falsely accused people.
Huh?
So it's a great little combo there that he's got in the background. Yeah, but he pops up quite often. So if you see someone who looks like Santiago, but he's showing off his leg, yeah, that is San Roche, the plague saint. And he pops up a lot along the Camino because he was in France and in the northern part of Spain is where a lot of his followers were. So you'll see him a bit. Okay, so now you've got a couple saints here. Let's up the ante. We can't really get past this without talking about Mary because she is everywhere. These are just a random sampling of several of them that I saw. And we'll talk about some of the noteworthy things here in just a minute. So, for example, we've got a couple of them here that you can see that are seated with the Christ child on her lap. These were in Estella and Los Arcos. And you can see one of the things I find really interesting here is it's not just Mary with the Christ child on her lap, but it's Mary as what we call co-redemptrix, as a co-savior, because she is also sitting in majesty with him. She's got the scepter, or the orb here. And in other ones, you'll see that she has the scepter. So the kind of here, she's got the orb. She probably had the scepter there. So you can see them kind of sharing that responsibility for being saviors of the world. And it's kind of a valuing of that mother figure, not just as for giving birth, but she is also a savior. And what this ties into is the way that religions work, which you probably heard about and probably have thought about. But when a religion goes to move into an area, to be successful, usually they will pull in parts of the religion that they are taking over and to help integrate it. So take things that are familiar to the people to help integrate them. So for example, here in the Virgin in Los Arcos, you see the moon there, the semicircular moon. That's pulling in what would have been the religion of the Romans. So you've got the idea of Artemis, of Diana, the virgin huntress. And so you'll see some of that. And we've pulled that iconography into our iconography of Mary as the Queen of Heaven. With this, with Mary, with a lot of having the Christ child with her, that's pulling in some of the stories from the East, where you've got Isis and Horus from Egypt. That sort of thing would have been brought back with the Knights Templar, or other origin stories that have a god dying and then coming back to life, or things like that. And you've got the mother of that god usually going through some sort of grieving process. The other thing that you'll see with that is, especially up in the Basque region, there were a whole bunch of deities, female deities called Maris, M-A-R-I-S, so very close to Mary, Mari. And they were usually associated with springs or with caves. And so with a lot of these different statues, there are stories about them where they are found in a spring, and they pull them out and they keep going back in the spring until a chapel is built for them, or they're found in a cave and they keep going back to the cave until a chapel is built for them. And it's that same idea of the Mari, the feminine goddess spirit of a place, and it's a way of incorporating that into the area as Christianity is taking over and gaining a foothold. The other thing that you really can't escape if you do any reading on this, and it's fascinating, it's not my area, so I'm referring you to someone who's got some great writing on it, are Black Madonnas. And there's a whole bunch of thought about this. Essentially, Black Madonnas are very special versions of the Virgin Mary, who, for example, the one in Los Arcos is said to have this very joyful aura, this one here. A lot of people describe when you're standing in front of them that you feel joy and euphoria, and they're a very beneficial and beneficent spirit there. And there's 4, depending on which accounts that you read, that you can see on the Camino Frances, and I've got them listed there, but in Puente la Arena, Estella, Los Arcos, and Ponferrada. And there's others depending on which accounts you're reading. The main thing is, in general, you can't always know that just because they are dark that they're a Black Madonna. So for example, this one in Pamplona Cathedral, even though she's Black, doesn't generally come up as being listed as a Black Madonna. This one doesn't look very Black, but she is listed as a Black Madonna. But it used to be because of their coloring, but often they may have started out one color but gotten stained darker over years of being in the incense and candle smoke and things like that in churches. So you can't always go on the coloring, but they are a really interesting, very special presence. And if you like that sort of thing, Bibi Barami's got some great stuff on it, both in her Moon Guide and in Wild Wild Goose, that you can read. And it does make a nice thing when you're walking a Camino, if you know that one is coming up in a town, just as something to look forward to and to see. And it's kind of special to make that trek. All right, so I'm thinking most of you pick up those so far. Let's go for some other low-hanging fruit. Who's this guy?
Sebastian.
Saint Sebastian. Okay. How do you know?
Pierced with arrows.
Yep. Yeah, the arrows are a dead giveaway. He's also one of the only ones other than Jesus that appears naked. And think about it from an artist's perspective. You would want to get, if you were really interested in the human figure, you'd want to get to do those people that you really got to do an anatomy study with. So Saint Sebastian is really popular, not just because, okay, he's a patron saint of San Sebastian, and so would have been appropriate to the area, but also this is your chance as an artist to really show off your technique and show off your ability to depict the human body at a time when people aren't running around naked all the time. Like, people are generally very, very close. So this would have been a great way to really showboat and show what a great artist you were. So I always see that. I always feel like when you get to see Saint Sebastian, that was an artist like, yes, finally, I get to do something other than draperies. Plus, you know, it's a chance to have someone, you know, kind of sexy that you can look at, other than all of these people all clothed, because you know, you get the abs, you get the definition and everything. Usually he's just wearing little loincloths. So I always think that was, you know, a little eye candy for everybody to look at when you're bored in church. Okay, so he's a really easy one, and he showed up a surprising amount on the Camino. Here's another one that may look confusing, but is really easy. And this, I cheated. I did see him on the Camino, but this is from a picture in France, something I took in France, which just happened to have everything that I wanted for the
John the
picture.
Baptist.
John the Baptist. Okay, so guess who said John the Baptist? How did you know?
Because he's baptizing Christ.
Yeah, he's baptizing Christ. So yeah, that's usually a dead giveaway. He's often baptizing Christ.
He has a staff also.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one is not wearing animal skins, which
He
could
is, but it's really hard
um,
to see because of the way that it's just a detail in stained glass. But if you look really closely at it, it is kind of shaggy.
Okay.
But it's hard to see, and I would say it's easier to pick out John the Baptist in paintings than it is in things like stained glass, because you lose that detail a lot, and oftentimes you're very far from stained glass, so it is really hard to pick that out.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, sometimes I'll have a staff, and sometimes it'll even say, just in case you were missing the point, Ecce Agnus Dei, here is the Lamb of God. So he's pointing like, I'm not Jesus, this guy is. So
And the dove.
and the dove. Yep. So we've got the Holy Spirit there shining down. Yeah. So you've got all the things. Okay. So everybody feeling good about that?
Yeah.
So far? Okay. So now we're going to move to some of my favorites, the female martyrs. Because again, just like Saint Sebastian, where that was an artist's chance to kind of showboat and say, hey, look what I can do. Imagine you're an artist. You don't get to see naked women very often, but you have one shot to do so. Because most of the time, most of the commissions during this time period are going to be religious art. That was the highest form of art. Secular art, boring, you are not a big deal. You're a big deal if you get to do religious art. But the only time you get to do something fun is when you get the female martyrs. So for example, Saint Agatha, that's my mother-in-law's name, so I always feel awkward talking about this because with the female martyrs, often they really relished showing the method in which they were martyred. And the way that female saints were martyred is often in some graphic way.
Yeah.
So this is Saint Agatha. You can't see it really well, but it's awesome. There's this person with these pinchers, and she's got her breasts displayed, and she was martyred by ripping off her breasts with these horrible little clamps, which is great. I'm just so grateful about this, which is perhaps not appropriate, but often you will see her with her breasts on a little plate.
Yeah.
And in fact, if I had more time or a larger presentation, I would show you. I took pictures all across Italy and Spain where there were these delicacies that were shaped like Saint Agatha's boobs on a plate, and it is great. So yeah, so you'll frequently see her either being martyred or with her breasts on a plate. So you'll always know that that is Saint Agatha. And so why were female saints often martyred during this time period? What usually irritated someone? It's for the same reason that things still happen today. So she wouldn't have sex with some powerful man, or ostensibly she wouldn't give up her religion, but nobody cared what her religion was. She wouldn't have sex with someone. And so she was killed for it.
Right.
Okay, then we've got Saint Lucy. So we don't get the boobs, but we get the eyeballs.
Eyeballs.
So you often see her carrying a little cup with her eyeballs in them. And then another one, this is just these last two, by the way, Saint Lucy and Saint Agnes. I just pulled those off of stock images because I didn't have good ones for those. But Saint Agnes is always an easy one to remember because she has a lamb. That's a play on words. Agnus, lamb, and Agnes. So easy one to spot. And you will spot them. I just didn't, when I was walking, I wasn't as excited by those. I was more interested in looking at the Santiago sculptures. But they will pop up a lot. And usually with the women, you get those great little graphic pictures of how they were martyred, or St. Catherine of Alexandria always has her wheel. And so you kind of can see those, and those are fun ones to look for.
And Kiki, I just want to say, somebody jumped in the chat and said there is an Agnes across the street from the Donativo in Ares, Arres. So I just wanted to point that out too.
Yay, yay. Oh, and I see, I'm looking at the chat down here that Shoshana's book has a lot of the Madonnas in it too. So yeah, I have not finished reading Shoshana's stuff, but yeah, that's another good place to go. So I'll have to add her to my reading list here at the end. Okay, So here's another thing, and I'm kind of coming to the end here, and then we'll have a pop quiz. So hopefully you've been paying attention here. Another thing that you will see very often, and this is a brand new picture, new if you're at my presentation at the gathering, I have changed this up because of something that I just did recently. So these are the 4 evangelists, and their key attributes is often they will be carrying a book. So I'll have a close up of these guys in a second. And sometimes they'll have a book, sometimes they'll have a person, but you will always see these 4 things. So Saint Mark will have the lion,
Yep.
Saint Luke will have the ox, Saint John will have the eagle, and poor old Matthew, sometimes he's got a book, or sometimes he's an angel, or sometimes it's just a guy. So if you get 3 out of the 4 and there's some other 4th dude standing there, that's Matthew. And because I guess they just ran out of any enthusiasm at that point to go with what Matthew was. And the reason I put them in this order is this is just how my brain remembers it, because I've been to Venice, and if you've been to Venice, you see the Lion of St. Mark, like atop Piazza San Marco everywhere. So it's easy for me to remember that lion is Mark. And then Luke, somewhere a long time ago, I read something that they remembered Luke as lox, like bagels and lox, put the L in front of ox. So then once I get lion and ox, then it's easy, because I remember Matthew's the one who, poor guy, didn't get anything, or is just an angel. So it's easy to remember that John is the eagle. So that's how my brain works. If you remember it in another way, great, go for it. But here's a close-up of them, so you can see there's St. Mark with his lion, and St. Luke with his ox,
Yeah.
John with his eagle, and then here's poor old Matthew. Not much anything, but there's a little angel head there. So you just kind of get what you get. And if you get 3 out of 4 and there's some poor guy standing there, it's usually St. Matthew. And I will take a second to brag about where I saw this, because it was really cool and it pertains to all of us. So this was in San Antonio, Texas, right here in my state. There's the new Camino de San Antonio missions, where you can go walk along the missions. And if you do that Camino, you get 30 kilometers that you can apply towards the Camino Inglés in Spain. So it's our only little snippet of Camino currently in the US that you can do that counts towards the Camino in Spain. So I just did that when I was out for the gathering, and it's a fun one. It's you could do it in one day pretty easily. It's about 13, 15 miles-ish, or you could split it up over 2 days and really kind of stop and enjoy it. But it's really cool. Okay, the other thing to show you is, as I was saying, oftentimes you will just see the symbols. So you've got one kind of generic male figure with a book, and then you've got the Lion of St. Mark, the eagle, the angel, and the ox, which here has wings. That's kind of interesting. But this is over the door in Burgos. And then I think this is my last one, who's my personal favorite, who I'll just touch on briefly. But this is a real Camino saint. This is Santo Domingo de la Calzada, and you can see him in the town of the same name. He was a guy who's near and dear to my heart, because he was born in the early 11th century in Vitoria. This is in his hometown. This is a little sculpture that they have for him there. And he was poor and illiterate, but he wanted to become a monk at the monastery at San Milan. But they didn't want to take him because he was poor and illiterate, and he wouldn't bring any money to the monastery. So they turned him away, but that didn't stop him from serving God's call. And he built a hospital that's now the Parador there in Santo Domingo de la Calzada, and really helped build a stretch of the Camino there as we know it. And the reason that I love him is he's got the chickens in his church. And these are actually, it's hard to see because it's really hard to see them, but this is a chicken there. It's the only church, I believe, in the world that is allowed to have live animals living in it. And it's these chickens. And they have to do with a legend that and again, you totally have to suspend disbelief on these things, where a pilgrim couple and their son stopped here on their way to Santiago. And the innkeeper's daughter thought the son was cute, so she tried to seduce him, but he was a virtuous youth and said no. So she planted some silver in, like a silver goblet or something, in his backpack. And as on their way out of town, he got arrested and was turned in for stealing it, and was sentenced to hang. Well, apparently his parents just kept on going to Santiago, which is a parent I can't really imagine that you would do that. Like, okay, well, see you later. Too bad you got hung. We're going to go on to Santiago. But on the way back, they noticed that the son was still hanging there and was alive. So they went to go see the sheriff and say, hey, cut our son down. He's still alive. It's been, 40 days and he's still alive there. So come have him back. And the sheriff scoffed and said something along the lines of, he's no more alive than this chicken here, this roasted chicken on my plate is. And then the chicken or the rooster or whatever it was by, in terms of the miracle, stood up and started crowing in the middle of the plate. So that's why they have the chickens in the chicken church in Santo Domingo de la Calzada. And so you'll see him around the area and you always will know it's him because you see the little chickens next to him. They're usually a chicken and a rooster. So I like him a lot. All right, so as
Kiki, sorry,
yes.
before you do that, we also had a discussion in the chat real quick that St. Peter is always the one holding the keys. So I just wanted to add that to that we had that discussion too.
Yep, you'll see Peter, and you will also frequently see him with another guy with a sword, which is St. Paul, because frequently Peter and Paul are together. So if you see St. Peter with the keys and another guy with the sword, that's usually St. Paul. And so they kind of come as a combo a lot of the time. So yeah, St. Peter does have the keys because he was the first bishop, right? He was the first, he had the keys to the kingdom, really. Jesus handed it off to him. So that's a way you can remember that. Awesome, thank you for that. Okay, so everybody ready for the pop quiz? Just go ahead and shout it out. So this is based on everything you've just seen. Everybody ready? All right.
Yep.
So name that saint. Start easy. Who's this?
Santiago.
Santiago.
Okay, how do you know? What's telling you? What attributes?
Board, stick.
Dopey
Agile.
hat.
Gorge, stick,
No,
dopey hat.
Hey,
He even got his cross there. So yeah.
oh
Okay.
yes, there's his cross too. Okay.
All right. Good job. Good job. Okay, what about this?
Saint Roche.
That's Saint Roche.
Mm-hmm.
That's Saint Michael, isn't it?
No,
Nope, that's
it's
Saint Roche. So how do you know it's Saint Roche?
Showing his leg.
Showing leg.
Sexy
Mhm.
leg.
Yep,
Okay.
he's showing his leg, and it might be a little hard to see, but he's got the staff and his gourd. And he's got his, so basically he's got the whole pilgrim kit on. I don't see the dog there, so dog is not pictured, so that can be a little confusing, but you know because he's showing his leg that he's Saint Roche rather than,
And this one has wings.
yeah, and this
Yeah,
one has wings.
And his boots.
Yeah, he's got the great boots, so, yeah, and sometimes they just throw wings on people for no apparent reason, just because it makes it a better picture.
But wings are next to know
Yeah. No, because he usually doesn't.
Oh,
Yeah, and in this one, again, I wonder what's going on. This is a fish that he's holding. So again, something local. Maybe he provided that town with fish or something. So you don't always know all the answers, but it does raise some interesting questions. Okay, what about this?
Santo Domingo de Calzada.
Okay, and how do you know?
The chickens.
Chickens.
Yep.
Chickens.
Chickens. What about this? This you might have to look real close on. Have to look really closely right here.
Eyeballs or breast.
Oh, Agatha.
Agnes?
Those are eyeballs. So who is that?
Oh,
Oh,
Lucy.
Lucy.
Lucy. I love
Yeah.
Lucy.
Yeah, it can be really hard to see. I tried to zoom in, but then it started to blow up the whole image. So yeah, that's St. Lucy with her eyeballs.
Yeah, boots.
And what about this?
Matamoros.
Yep, that's Santiago Matamoros. And this was in 2022. This is over the main altar in Santiago. So I know some people were saying in the chat that some people had that maybe it was covered with flowers now, but as of November 1st of 2022, they were still right there and easy to see.
Why would they cover him? Well,
Okay, bonus round. Who's that?
Saint Matthew.
Saint Peter. Oh, no.
So whoever said Matthew, you are right. That is the angel. But sometimes also, I had this covered. Sometimes they make it easy for you. They will tell you who it is that you're looking at. So don't make it harder than it has to be. If it's labeled, it probably is that saint. Okay. And then here's the final bonus round. Name as many saints as you can see
San
there.
Sebastian.
Oh, there's Saint
Sebastian.
Roche.
San Sebastian.
And Saint Rose.
Pieros.
Yep. So you got the trifecta here, right? You got Saint
And
Sebastian,
Mary.
you got Saint Rose, and you got Mary with the Pietà of deposed Jesus. So yeah, you got the whole thing. And that was like this little like, storeroom in one of the churches. All right, so just to wrap this up, a couple things. If you don't know what you're looking at, there are still a couple things that you can observe about something that you're looking at that can at least make looking at it more interesting. So for example, if you see someone who's depicted with a palm, like a tree branch in their hand, you know that person was probably martyred somehow. If they've got a lily in their hand, that usually symbolizes purity or virginity. So you can make some guesses there. If they have a book that is almost so ubiquitous as to be meaningless, but usually what it means is that someone who added something to the knowledge of the church. So usually they're a doctor of the church, someone who added to the knowledge of the church, but sometimes they just give it to them to give them something to hold. If they're wearing a religious habit or headwear, sometimes it does mean indeed that they were a monk or a nun or something like that. But sometimes people get dressed up that way to show that they were particularly pious and they weren't really. But at least it gives you a place to start thinking about it. And as I mentioned before, sometimes you can see the method of their martyrdom in the picture. So like St. Catherine of Alexandria's wheel, or St. Andrew is usually depicted with the sideways cross because he didn't want to be crucified the way that Christ was, because he wasn't equal to that. He wasn't as good as Christ. He didn't want to be equal to Christ. And just sometimes some interesting bits of martyrdom. Some other things that you can look at, and this was from when I went and did Machu Picchu, I saw this and thought this was fabulous. So this is a Last Supper, of course, but you start looking and go, what are they eating? And when you start looking at this, this is not something that would have happened in the 1st century AD or in the Common
Guinea
Era.
pig,
Right?
a guinea pig.
Yeah, they've got guinea pig because it's down. Yeah, they've got corn. They've got some fruits that are not European fruits. A loaf of fine white bread, which would not have been a thing in 1st century Judea. If you start looking at the utensils, this might be a fork, and a fork was not used until the 15th century. That was a common insult way back when you were a forkifer. If you were a fork user, that was very like, oh, aren't you advanced, taking all the new technology. And if you look at the tablecloths and the flooring, again, this is like a woven velvet and a woven linen that wouldn't have been technology that they would have had at the time of the Last Supper. And one thing I find particularly interesting about this picture is this is Judas here. He's painted with the face of Pizarro, the conqueror, the person who conquered Peru. So I think that was like just a particularly screwy little moment there. Same kind of thing here. This is Sandro Botticelli's Annunciation, the scene where the angel is telling Mary that she's going to have a son. Well, again, this clothing reflects the clothing that was current in the artist's lifetime, not what would have been current in Judea in the 1st century. So you've got things like this great thin linen that would not have been something that could have been woven that long ago, but was great in the 14th, 15th century. This style of clothing was very much a medieval like fashion show, but wouldn't have been current there. And when you look at the castles in the background and this espaliered tree, again, those are things that would have been current in the artist's lifetime and would have been very chic and hip, but wouldn't have been a thing that would have occurred back at the time of the actual Annunciation. So you can see those little details and it makes it more interesting rather than, oh, okay, here's another Annunciation scene. So it's something to look at. All right. So just to finish up, you know more than you think you know as you're going along. You have a lot of things that you can read into these things and get clued in. Looking at the attributes, by looking at the things that they carry, even if you don't know who or what you're looking at, you can start to make some pretty solid guesses. And even when you can't identify a particular saint exactly, there's still a lot of these things that you can look at that can make visiting that church more interesting because you can see these details that were local details. And of course, the final takeaway is sometimes you'll get lucky and the painting or sculpture will be labeled, in which case, hey, you got it. All right. So any questions?
So Kiki, I've got a couple. First, a lot of thank yous in the chat for this. So we're really grateful for that. We've also gotten a couple questions about video recordings. And yes, in fact, Martin Pena, who's on this call, will be doing the, I don't know, editing and finishing up of everything, but we will post it on our YouTube channel. So it will be available for that. We also got a comment that there are lots of statues of Santiago Peregrino in the Bishop's Palace in Astorga and in the new museum in Santiago. So if people are interested in those are available. We had a question about, someone noticed that there were a lot of St. Martin de Tours very present on the Camino. And so they were wondering, probably a French saint, you know, but how could we spot him and what are other popular saints that we should keep our eyes out for?
So St. Martin de Tours is very confusing. in that he look a lot like Santiago Matamoros. So he is usually, in fact, I confused him in my presentation. I took him out of this presentation because I had been fooled. I didn't look closely at what I used, and Mary Jane Dunn thankfully corrected me, so I took him out of this presentation. I had one that I thought was Santiago Matamoros, and it was actually St. Martin of Tours. He is usually shown very similar in that he's got usually a knife or a sword, but he is and dressed very much in the Peregrino gear, but he's usually ripping or dividing cloth to clothe people. And so there's usually some people next to him that in the depiction that I had, it looks like Moors because they're actually wearing clothing and everything, but he's dividing his cloak to help clothe people. And the reason you'll see him is one of the big pilgrimage routes goes through Tours and goes down into Spain and joins up with the Camino Frances. So you will see him especially in northern Spain, Basque region, that sort of thing, because that Camino route goes through there. So you will see him. So what was that?
He's also on a horse too.
Right, and he's also on a horse. And he looks, so it looks very similar to Santiago Matamoros. So if someone isn't actually killing or threatening people, but appears to be holding up a cloth and dividing it, usually a red cloth, and especially if the people that are with him aren't on the ground, but they're following him naked or underclothed, that can be a way that you can tell the difference. But it looks very similar.
Okay.
And other saints that you can watch out for, there are so many that are saints that are known just in that place that it can be kind of fun, like Santo Domingo de la Calzada, you won't really hear about outside of that area. So there are lots of little tiny ones like San Fermin in Pamplona, the one with the running of the bulls. But as you get into the towns, there will usually be statues of them that are labeled and you can find out more about them. So locally, it will just differ from town to town, but they're so tiny that you don't hear much about them.
Maybe.
You mentioned Shoshana's book. Could you put the information about that on too?
I will. Let's see. I just look at this. I'm so prepared. So you don't have. I can't even see myself on camera. But yes, I will type it in the chat. I've got 2 of her books. I know she probably has more, but I'll type those in the chat right now.
Great, thank you.
Okay, just checking to see if we have any more questions. We have a few more minutes.
Thank you.
I missed what you said was the identifying quality of St. Paul. Could you just repeat, please?
St. Paul usually has a sword, and he's usually not depicted. I mean, he could be depicted alone, but usually if you see St. Peter with the keys with some other guy that has a sword, usually that is St. Paul. They usually kind of go hand in hand depicted that way.
He's also usually bald with a long beard.
Yeah, true.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
All right, I've got one of Shoshana's books in there, and I'm about to put the other one in there.
Great. Well, as we wrap up, Kiki, I just want to say thank you very much on behalf of the audience and American Pilgrims. I was lucky enough to see your presentation at the gathering and loved it there, and it's even better the second time. So thank you so much. It really adds a lot of color to many of the things we see while walking on the Camino. So thank you so much. I love your presentation and your humor and irreverence associated with that.
Great,
So,
thank you, Martin.
So Allison, I think Allison's, we lost her audio, so I'm just going to wrap it up here. So thank you very much for attending, everyone. We appreciate you attending these national events. And as we mentioned, we'll have this available for you to view on demand on the YouTube channel, hopefully very quickly. So stay tuned for that. So thanks, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you.